Hello everyone, welcome to Mr. Bean Family Stories channel. This is where we bring you interesting, funny and inspiring stories from Mr. Bean family every day. You will meet me, Mr. Bean's daughter, someone you may be familiar with and I hope you love, my dad with his surprising and meaningful stories, and my lovely brother who always brings positive energy with his stories close to life. Every day, one of us will share new stories, interesting journeys, and today it's my turn. I will take you on an exciting adventure, but also with profound lessons about life. Today's story carries a simple but important message: never judge something by its appearance. Behind that appearance, there are always surprises waiting for us. If you like our family dynamic, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of our stories on this amazing journey. Share this video with your friends, family, and loved ones, and don't forget to leave some interesting comments to let me know what you think. Now, let's dive into today's story and dive into the world of surprises. Let's get started. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Elizabeth Collins' downtown Chicago apartment, casting a soft glow across the spacious, minimalist living room. The gentle hum of the city beyond was a familiar background to her quiet morning routine. At 40, Elizabeth had perfected the art of starting her day in a way that set the tone for the rest of it. Her chestnut hair was pulled back into a simple ponytail, and she wore no makeup, just the natural glow of someone who prioritized health over appearance. She sipped her coffee, savoring the warmth as she gazed out at the shimmering expanse of Lake Michigan. It was one of those mornings that made her grateful for the life she had built. The calmness of the lake contrasted with the hustle of the city, and she enjoyed the balance. Despite the wealth that came with her marriage to William Collins, a billionaire investor, Elizabeth remained grounded. She never felt the need to put on a facade, which was a rarity in a city where appearances often mattered more than substance. The sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway, and Elizabeth's husband, William, appeared in the doorway, adjusting his tie. He was always in a rush, heading off to the investment firm he had founded and turned into one of Chicago's most successful companies. "You sure you don't want me to come with you?" His voice carried a tone of both concern and affection as he leaned against the doorframe. Elizabeth smiled up at him, shaking her head. "I've got this, Will. You know how I feel about these things." William chuckled, the sound warm and familiar. "I do indeed. That's why I married you." His eyes softened as he gave her a quick kiss on the forehead. "Well, I'll see you tonight then. Don't let anyone give you a hard time." Elizabeth rolled her eyes playfully, always amazed at how her husband, despite his massive fortune, still managed to hold on to a level of humility that many would envy. "When have I ever let that happen?" she teased. He smiled, giving her one last look before heading out the door. The sound of the elevator dinging could be heard faintly in the background as the door closed behind him. Elizabeth returned her gaze to the lake, deep in thought for a moment. Today felt different, though she couldn't quite put her finger on why. Maybe it was the thought of buying a new car, or perhaps it was simply that feeling of independence that came from making decisions on her own. Her old sedan had finally given up the ghost, something she had been anticipating for months but had stubbornly put off. She had always preferred driving a practical, reliable vehicle, much like her approach to life in general. But today, after years of resisting William's constant suggestions to upgrade, she had decided it was time. Not because she craved luxury, but because she had done the research and found a model that aligned with her values: environmentally conscious, safe, and practical. She placed her coffee cup down and walked toward the closet, choosing a simple navy sweatshirt with Chicago emblazoned across the front, along with a pair of well-worn jeans. The casual look suited her. After all, she wasn't trying to impress anyone with designer labels. For her, comfort was always the priority. Elizabeth quickly glanced in the mirror, adjusting her ponytail. At 40, her face told the story of a life well lived. There were laugh lines around her eyes, but they only added to the warmth of her expression. She didn't care about the wrinkles or the lack of makeup. She felt good in her skin, something far more important to her than any societal expectations. She grabbed her crossbody bag, making sure to tuck William's black card securely inside. She rarely used it, preferring her own modest credit card for most purchases. But today, she knew it would be necessary. A new car was a different kind of purchase, one that she couldn't pass up. As she closed the door behind her, she couldn't shake the sense that today would turn out to be anything but ordinary. Elizabeth slid into her car, a decade-old sedan that now felt more like a relic than a reliable vehicle. The contrast between her worn car and the sleek, expensive models displayed outside the showroom windows was stark, and she couldn't help but smile at the thought. She had always avoided the flashy, luxury cars that her husband's world seemed to revolve around, preferring the practicality of her own choices. But today was different. As she drove through the familiar streets of downtown Chicago, she couldn't help but appreciate the beauty of the city. The towering buildings, the busy streets, the sense of energy that permeated every corner, it was all part of the reason she loved living here. But it wasn't the glamour that appealed to her. It was the raw authenticity, the hustle of people trying to make a difference, whether they had millions in the bank or were just scraping by. She navigated the winding streets of the Gold Coast, where the city's elite lived. The contrast between the elegant brownstones and the opulent car dealerships was obvious, but Elizabeth didn't feel out of place. She had lived here for over a decade and had seen the city's changes, the rise of wealth and power, and the subtle undercurrents of privilege that ran through its streets. Despite it all, she always stayed true to herself. The Prestige Auto Gallery came into view, its sleek glass facade reflecting the early afternoon sunlight. Elizabeth pulled into the parking lot, parking her old sedan between a luxury sports car and a businessman's high-end SUV. She straightened her sweatshirt, took a deep breath, and stepped out of the car with a sense of purpose. She was here to make a decision, and it was her decision alone. As she entered the showroom, the polished marble floor gleamed beneath her feet. The space was an embodiment of luxury, gleaming cars displayed on raised platforms, their curves accentuated by the perfect lighting. A soft piano concerto played in the background, and the air was scented with a custom fragrance that reeked of wealth. Every corner, every detail seemed designed to whisper, "This is for the elite." The salespeople, all dressed in identical blue suits, scattered throughout the showroom, their eyes flicking toward her as she walked in. Elizabeth could feel their gaze, the way their posture stiffened when she entered. Yet no one came to greet her. No one made any move to approach the woman in jeans and a sweatshirt, her plain appearance clearly not fitting the typical profile of a high-end buyer. She wandered between the rows of cars, her fingers lightly grazing the smooth surfaces of a particularly stunning red sports coupe, the golden luxury sedan, and the sleek black SUV. Still, not a single salesperson came to offer their assistance. She noticed a couple enter behind her, he in a crisp suit, she in an expensive dress, and immediately, two salespeople moved to greet them. Elizabeth's smile was subtle, but it was there. This wasn't the first time her appearance had led to assumptions. She had learned to live with the stares, the glances, the way people often sized her up before she had even opened her mouth. It wasn't the first time she'd been judged by her clothes, and she doubted it would be the last. Her eyes fell on a golden sedan, the Crown Victoria Sovereign. It caught her attention, and she bent down to take a closer look at the interior, noting the fine craftsmanship. The smooth leather seats, the sleek dashboard, the elegant design, everything about it screamed luxury. She had researched this car extensively, down to the fine details about its hybrid engine, its regenerative braking system, and its top-tier safety features. It wasn't just a status symbol. It was a car that matched her values, sustainable, efficient, and practical. A voice finally broke the silence. "Can I help you?" Elizabeth turned to see a young salesman standing a few feet away. He didn't seem to be one of the senior staff, but rather someone who had been relegated to the periphery. His eyes flickered nervously as he took in her appearance. "I'm just looking for now," Elizabeth replied with a warm smile, not wanting to rush him. "But I'm in the market for a new car." "I see," he said, his tone clearly implying that he wasn't sure if someone like her could afford the type of car she was looking at. Well, let me know if you have any questions. These models might be a bit premium for most budgets. Elizabeth didn't flinch. She had heard that line before. I'm particularly interested in this one, she said, indicating the golden sedan. The Crown Victoria Sovereign, the hybrid model with the enhanced safety package. The young salesman blinked, clearly taken aback. Yes, that's correct. You know your cars. I do my research, Elizabeth said simply, the pride in her voice unmistakable. She began asking him more detailed questions about the car's features, the warranty, the hybrid system, the safety ratings. The salesman's tone began to shift, albeit slowly. He started to engage more genuinely, but Elizabeth could tell there was still a lingering doubt. Out of the corner of her eye, Elizabeth noticed a senior salesman, tall, with perfectly combed hair and a posture that radiated authority, watching them from across the room. She could tell it was only a matter of time before their interaction drew attention, and not necessarily in a good way. Elizabeth leaned slightly into the open car door, admiring the luxurious interior of the Crown Victoria Sovereign. Her fingers traced the smooth leather of the steering wheel as she nodded in quiet appreciation. The balance between elegance and innovation was exactly what she had expected from the countless hours she'd spent researching. Kevin, the young salesman, was starting to warm up to her, clearly impressed by her depth of knowledge. You're absolutely right, he said, responding to her comment about the regenerative braking system. The engineers overhauled the design this year. It's the most efficient braking system on the market, especially for a hybrid of this size. Elizabeth smiled. That's what I thought. And the cabin insulation, this is the model with the acoustic laminated glass, correct? Exactly. You'll barely hear the city outside when you're driving, Kevin replied with a growing sense of ease. I have to say, not many people walk in asking about those kinds of details. You know your stuff. I didn't come here to play pretend, she said casually. When I make a big purchase, I come prepared. As she sat behind the wheel, adjusting the seat to her liking, she could feel herself settling into the moment. The car fit her physically, yes, but also ideologically. It aligned with everything she valued: safety, efficiency, sustainability, and smart design. This wasn't about status. It was about intention. But before Kevin could begin demonstrating the infotainment system, a shadow stretched across the driver's side window. Elizabeth looked up and saw the tall, older salesman, sharp suit, perfectly styled hair, posture exuding authority, approach with a polite but calculated smile. Kevin stepped back instinctively. Mr. Dalton, he said with a nervous nod. Dalton's smile didn't quite reach his eyes as he spoke. Kevin, I believe the Hendersons need assistance with their paperwork. I'll take over here. Kevin hesitated, visibly uncomfortable with the shift. Yes, sir. He turned to Elizabeth with a faint, regretful smile. It was a pleasure speaking with you, ma'am. The pleasure was mine, Kevin. Thank you, Elizabeth replied warmly, sensing what was coming. As Kevin walked away, Mr. Dalton moved in with practiced ease, his tone immediately shifting to the kind of detached professionalism Elizabeth had encountered far too many times before. I see you're interested in the Sovereign, he said, giving the car a cursory glance before letting his eyes settle on her. It's our flagship model, starting at $175,000. Elizabeth gave a polite nod. Yes, Kevin was just walking me through the infotainment system and safety specs. I'm particularly impressed with the cabin design. Dalton arched a brow, a flicker of surprise crossing his features before returning to his carefully neutral expression. It's an excellent choice. Of course, we do offer a range of more accessible models as well, in case the Sovereign is beyond your current needs. The pause before current needs wasn't long, but it was intentional. And Elizabeth heard it loud and clear. She stepped out of the vehicle slowly, her face composed. Actually, the Sovereign checks all the boxes for me: environmental efficiency, safety, performance. Dalton gave a polite chuckle, the kind that masked condescension beneath charm. At this level, most of our clients prioritize horsepower over carbon footprint. I'm not most of your clients, Elizabeth replied calmly, folding her arms. The exchange hung heavy between them. Dalton took a quick glance at her attire again, sweatshirt, jeans, crossbody bag, and recalibrated. Well, if you're serious about this model, we should talk financing options. These vehicles typically require substantial down payments and excellent credit scores. That won't be necessary, Elizabeth said evenly. If I decide to purchase, I'll be paying in full today. For the first time, Dalton's mask faltered. There was a beat, barely a second, but in that moment, disbelief flashed in his eyes. He quickly recovered, but it was too late. Elizabeth had seen it. And so had several others nearby. Dalton's smile tightened, now less genuine and more forced. I see, he said, masking his surprise with a measured tone. That's certainly an unusual approach, Miss Collins, Elizabeth supplied calmly. Elizabeth Collins. Well, Miss Collins, Dalton continued, the edges of his smile still tight, we can certainly discuss financing, though I must say most of our clients prefer to handle transactions of this nature through a more conventional route. Elizabeth's gaze didn't waver. I'm sure they do. But as I said, I'll be paying in full. Dalton's expression faltered slightly, but he quickly regained his composure, clearing his throat. If you're certain, Miss Collins, we can move forward. Of course, the Sovereign is a high-end vehicle, $175,000, as I mentioned. I'm aware of the price, Elizabeth replied, her tone firm but polite. And I've done my research. It's exactly what I'm looking for. As Dalton began talking about the terms and conditions, Elizabeth noticed the faint shift in the showroom's atmosphere. The air felt charged now, heavier with the unspoken tension that had been building ever since she'd walked through the doors. The other salespeople, who had been engaged in their own tasks, were now subtly watching the interaction. It was as if they were waiting for something to happen, perhaps hoping for a confrontation, perhaps anticipating an awkward moment. And then, the moment came. Dalton leaned in slightly, his posture becoming less professional and more condescending. Miss Collins, I've been in this business for over 15 years, and I can usually tell a serious buyer within the first few minutes. And I'll be honest with you, it's hard for me to believe that someone in your current situation would be able to afford this particular vehicle. Elizabeth's eyes narrowed slightly, but she maintained her composure. She wasn't surprised. She had seen this before, the judgment, the assumptions based solely on how she looked. She had been dismissed countless times for nothing more than her appearance, but she was done tolerating it. My situation? Elizabeth repeated, her voice steady but now laced with an edge of disbelief. And what exactly do you mean by that? Dalton leaned back slightly, clearly pleased with himself. Well, let's be honest. You're not exactly dressed for a purchase of this magnitude. People like you, he motioned vaguely toward her jeans and sweatshirt, don't typically make these kinds of purchases. People like me? Elizabeth echoed, her voice cool. The smile on her face didn't quite reach her eyes now. And what exactly does that mean, Mr. Dalton? He seemed to falter for a brief moment, but then he continued, trying to justify his words. It's just common sense. This car is for high-level executives, entrepreneurs, people who are accustomed to a certain lifestyle. Your attire suggests you may not be in that bracket. Elizabeth's heart beat steadily, and she could feel her patience slipping away. Her decision was made, but something about the way Dalton was speaking to her, so arrogantly, so dismissively, felt like a personal challenge. She stood a little straighter, meeting his gaze head-on. Mr. Dalton, she began slowly, I want you to understand something. It's not just about the car. It's not even about how much money I have, or don't have, according to you. It's about the assumptions you've made. It's about how you've decided, based on nothing but my clothes, that I don't belong here. Dalton's face flushed a subtle shade of red, and he shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. I didn't mean to. Oh, I'm sure you didn't mean to, Elizabeth interrupted, her voice measured. But the problem is, you did. You made a snap judgment about me, about my worth, about my ability to afford this car, all based on how I look. You assumed that because I'm not wearing a designer suit, I don't belong here. That's not just unprofessional, Mr. Dalton. It's disrespectful. The silence in the showroom grew heavier, the tension palpable. Elizabeth could feel eyes on her, but she refused to let the pressure sway her. This wasn't just about the car anymore. It was about standing up for herself, for every person who had been judged by their appearance and dismissed because of it. Dalton opened his mouth, but no words came out. For a moment, he seemed genuinely at a loss. But Elizabeth didn't wait for him to recover. "I'd like to speak with your manager," she said calmly, her voice carrying across the showroom. Dalton's face tightened, but he nodded curtly. "Of course. Please, if you'll follow me." As he turned to lead her to the back of the showroom, Elizabeth stood still for a moment, her hand resting lightly on the top of the car. She didn't know what would happen next, but she was sure of one thing: she was not going to let this pass quietly. Not this time. She had worked too hard to build the life she had, and she wasn't going to let someone like Dalton, someone who judged her based solely on appearances, take that away from her. Elizabeth followed Mr. Dalton through the showroom, her steps purposeful, though her mind was racing. She had always been someone who prided herself on staying calm under pressure, but this was different. The weight of the judgment she had just faced, the dismissive tone in Dalton's voice, had struck a nerve she hadn't anticipated. This wasn't just about a car anymore. It was about respect, and she wasn't going to let it go unanswered. As they reached the glass-walled office at the back of the showroom, Dalton turned to her with a forced smile, his posture stiff. "I'll let Mr. Reynolds know you're here," he said curtly, stepping into the office to make the call. Elizabeth stood still just outside the office, her arms crossed loosely in front of her, waiting. She could hear Dalton's voice through the thin walls, his tone attempting to sound professional but laced with irritation. He was probably telling his manager about the situation that had unfolded, framing it in whatever way he thought would make him look less culpable. She leaned against the cold, polished marble of the showroom, taking in the ambience one last time. The showroom, with its pristine design and perfectly curated vehicles, no longer felt like a place of luxury. Instead, it felt like a stage for performance, a place where appearance was everything, and people like her were deemed unworthy based on something as trivial as clothing. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, the sound breaking the silence. She pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was a text from William. "William, how's the car shopping going? Found anything yet?" She paused for a moment, fingers hovering over the keyboard. How could she explain what had just happened without sounding like she was overreacting? She took a deep breath and typed back, choosing her words carefully. "Elizabeth, it's been an interesting experience so far. I'll tell you more tonight. Don't worry about me." A small smile tugged at the corner of her lips as she sent the message. William had always been supportive, but today, she felt more determined than ever to handle this on her own. She had done her research, and she knew exactly what she wanted. This wasn't about impressing anyone or living up to anyone's expectations. It was about making her own decisions and being treated with the respect she deserved. Moments later, Dalton returned, his smile now stiff and professional, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of discomfort. "Mr. Reynolds will be right with you," he said, stepping aside to let her into the office. The office was an extension of the showroom's luxurious design, sleek, glass walls, expensive leather chairs, and a large desk that seemed more like a display piece than a functional workspace. It looked immaculate, but it didn't feel warm. It didn't feel welcoming. A man rose from behind the desk as she entered, Mr. Reynolds, she assumed. He was older than Dalton, with graying hair and a well-tailored suit that screamed authority. He extended his hand with a smile, but there was something in his eyes that didn't quite match the gesture. "Miss Collins, I'm sorry for the inconvenience," Mr. Reynolds said in a tone that was a little too polished, a little too practiced. I understand there was a misunderstanding with my associate. Please, have a seat. Elizabeth didn't take his hand right away. Instead, she glanced at the chair and then at the desk, choosing to remain standing. I appreciate your willingness to speak with me, but I'm not sure what there is to misunderstand, she said coolly. What happened here today wasn't just a mistake. It was a blatant assumption based on nothing but my appearance. Mr. Reynolds' smile faltered for a second, but he recovered quickly. I assure you, Miss Collins, we value all our clients. My team is well trained, but sometimes there can be lapses in judgment. I apologize if you felt disrespected. Felt? Elizabeth repeated, her voice rising slightly. I wasn't feeling disrespected, Mr. Reynolds. I was disrespected. Your employee made a public judgment about my financial capability and my worth as a customer based solely on how I look. She could see a flicker of discomfort in his eyes now. He wasn't used to customers who spoke so directly, especially when it came to issues of class and judgment. I understand your frustration, Miss Collins. And again, I sincerely apologize for the way you were treated. I'm glad you understand, Elizabeth replied, her voice calm but firm. But an apology isn't enough. You can't just apologize and expect this to go away. This was a demonstration of how your dealership, and possibly your staff, view people who don't fit the mold of your typical customer. Mr. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably in his chair, avoiding her gaze for a brief moment before speaking again. I'll make sure this is addressed internally. You have my word. Elizabeth leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with him. That's not enough, Mr. Reynolds. I've worked hard for everything I have, and I won't let someone like Dalton or anyone else here decide my worth based on superficial assumptions. Mr. Reynolds cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. He shifted in his chair, his fingers lightly tapping the edge of his desk as if searching for the right words. I understand your point, Miss Collins. And I assure you, we value all of our clients, regardless of appearance. We try to offer personalized service, but there are occasional misunderstandings. Elizabeth didn't let his words soften her resolve. This wasn't just a misunderstanding, Mr. Reynolds. This was a deliberate judgment based on nothing more than my clothes. I can't believe you think that's an occasional lapse. This kind of thinking is systemic, and it's something your dealership needs to address, not just apologize for. Reynolds seemed taken aback by her sharpness, his smile faltering once again. He clearly wasn't used to being challenged in this way, especially in such a high-end, polished environment. You're right, Miss Collins, he said slowly, his voice tinged with reluctant acknowledgement. And I'm truly sorry for the way you've been treated. It's unacceptable. I'll speak with Dalton and ensure something like this doesn't happen again. Elizabeth pressed her lips together, her eyes narrowing slightly. I'm sure you will. But that's not enough. A simple conversation with your staff won't undo what's been done here today. It's more than just one person's mistake. It's a culture of discrimination that's clearly rooted in your business. You see people based on their outward appearance and decide if they fit your idea of a worthy customer. Reynolds leaned forward, his face reddening. Miss Collins, I assure you, that's not our intention. We cater to high-net-worth individuals, and sometimes, we can be a little overzealous in our approach. But it's never been our goal to offend anyone, especially not our clients. Elizabeth stood tall, not allowing him to deflect her words. Mr. Reynolds, let me make this clear. The problem isn't just with Dalton, and it isn't just about the way I was treated today. The issue is much deeper. It's about the assumptions you make about your clients based on their appearance. You're so focused on projecting an image of exclusivity that you forget the most important thing, that every person, regardless of how they look, deserves to be treated with respect. Reynolds paused for a moment, then nodded, his expression somber. You're absolutely right. I can see now that we've made a serious mistake. And I promise you, we will take steps to rectify this. Elizabeth's gaze never wavered. I'm glad to hear that, but actions speak louder than words. I want to see real change. I want to make sure that no one else ever walks through those doors and gets treated like I did simply because they're not wearing a $5,000 suit. There was a moment of silence in the office, the weight of her words hanging heavily in the air. Reynolds seemed to understand that this was no longer just about one customer. It was about the future of his business and how his employees interacted with the people who walked through those doors. "Miss Collins," he said slowly, his voice more genuine now, "I understand your frustration. And I can see that what you're asking for isn't just about one instance. It's about creating a culture where all customers are valued equally, regardless of their outward appearance. We'll take immediate action. We'll implement training for all of our staff on unconscious bias, and I'll personally oversee the changes." Elizabeth nodded, satisfied with the shift in his tone. "That's a good start. But I won't be returning to this dealership. Not unless I see proof that this truly changes. The last thing I want is for you to treat me like some token of a lesson learned." Reynolds looked down, clearly chastened. "I completely understand, Miss Collins. I only hope you'll reconsider. I'll be happy to personally assist you should you decide to give us another chance in the future." Elizabeth smiled, though it was a tight, measured smile. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Reynolds. But I think I'll be looking elsewhere. You've lost my business today, not just because of Dalton's behavior, but because you allowed it to happen." She turned toward the door, her steps steady, though inside, she felt the weight of what had just happened. She had made her point, and she knew it wouldn't be easy for them to forget. But she also knew that it wasn't just about one person. This was bigger than that. It was about holding people accountable for their actions, about forcing a change in a culture that had long valued appearances over the worth of a person. As she walked back into the showroom, she noticed that the eyes of the other salespeople were following her. They had all witnessed the exchange, and Elizabeth knew that what had just happened would ripple through the dealership. Dalton was nowhere to be seen, likely holed up somewhere trying to recover from his own embarrassment. Elizabeth paused by the front door, where the receptionist had been watching the entire interaction. The woman gave her a small, sympathetic smile, as if to acknowledge the unspoken understanding between them. Elizabeth returned the smile briefly before stepping outside. She had done it. She had stood up for herself, for every person who had ever been judged by their appearance. As she walked toward her car, she couldn't help but feel a sense of quiet pride. She hadn't just taken a stand for herself, she had forced the dealership to confront its own prejudices and biases. And in doing so, she had taken one small step toward making the world a little more equitable. As she drove away from Prestige Auto Gallery, she felt the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. She had accomplished what she had set out to do. But this wasn't the end. She knew that there would be more battles to fight, more people to stand up for. And Elizabeth Collins was ready for them. The drive back to her apartment was a blur. Elizabeth's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual, her mind replaying every moment of the confrontation at Prestige Auto Gallery. Despite the clarity she had felt during the exchange, a tinge of doubt crept in. Did she push too hard? Was she too confrontational? As she turned into the parking garage of her building, she tried to shake off the lingering frustration. It was done. She had made her point, and now it was time to move on. But deep down, she knew that this wasn't just about a car purchase, it was about something much larger. The way people were treated, the assumptions made, the judgments cast, it was a pattern she had seen in countless other places, with countless other people. She parked the car and took a deep breath before getting out. The cool air of the evening greeted her as she walked toward the entrance of the building. Her mind wandered back to her conversation with William earlier. He had been supportive, as always, but she hadn't shared everything with him. How could she explain the humiliation? How could she explain the feeling of being reduced to nothing more than the clothes on her back? As she entered the apartment, the familiar scent of fresh coffee and candles greeted her. It was a sharp contrast to the sterile, high-end environment she had just left behind. She dropped her keys into the bowl by the door and kicked off her shoes, sighing in relief. The simple, comforting environment of her home was what she needed right now. William was sitting on the couch, his laptop open, but when he saw her, he immediately closed it and stood up. "How did it go?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. Elizabeth smiled faintly, though her eyes betrayed the fatigue she was feeling. "It was eventful," she said, walking toward the kitchen and pulling out a bottle of wine. She didn't wait for his reply as she opened it and poured herself a glass. "Let's just say I'm not buying a car from them." William raised an eyebrow, his expression both amused and curious. "You didn't?" "No, I didn't buy the car," Elizabeth interrupted. She took a sip of the wine, letting the smooth taste settle before continuing. "I went in, as planned, and, well, things took a turn." William sat back down, his eyes never leaving her face. "What happened?" Elizabeth exhaled, running a hand through her hair as she leaned against the counter. She told him about the interaction with Dalton and the manager, Reynolds. She told him about the assumptions made based on her appearance and how she had stood her ground. She even recounted the moment she had asked for the manager and how the apology came, but it hadn't felt like enough. When she finished, William didn't immediately respond. He just sat there, taking in her words, his gaze thoughtful. Finally, he nodded. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly. "I know you don't like confrontation, but sometimes people need to be called out." Elizabeth gave a small laugh, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "It wasn't about the confrontation. It was about something bigger than just me. It's about how people like me are judged before we even open our mouths." William stood up and walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I know. And I think you made a real impact. They won't forget what happened today. Maybe they'll change, maybe they won't. But I'm glad you stood up for yourself, and for everyone else who's ever been dismissed like that." Elizabeth took a deep breath, feeling a little of the weight lift off her shoulders. "I hope so. I really do." The conversation shifted after that, as William reached for his phone to check his emails. But Elizabeth was still processing everything. What she had done today, how she had pushed back against a system that rewarded appearances over substance, it felt like a small victory, but also like just the beginning of something much larger. She didn't know what would come of it, but one thing was certain, she wasn't going to sit idly by anymore. The next few days passed in a blur of routine, but Elizabeth couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted within her. The conversation with William had given her some peace, but there was an underlying sense of urgency, of unfinished business. She had confronted the dealership and made a statement, but that wasn't enough. She couldn't let it end there. At work, she was consumed with her projects, but her mind would wander back to the showroom, to the judgmental looks and dismissive words. She hadn't let it bother her at the time, but now it gnawed at her. She had to do something more than just walking away. She had always prided herself on taking control of her own life, on not relying on anyone else's validation. But now, she realized, this was about changing a culture, making a statement that would ripple beyond her individual experience. It wasn't until Thursday afternoon that Elizabeth received a call that would push her into the next step. The number wasn't familiar, but something about it piqued her curiosity. She picked up the phone, her thumb hovering over the screen as she prepared for the unknown. "Miss Collins," a voice said on the other end. It was smooth, professional, with a hint of urgency. "This is Sarah Jenkins from Lakeside Motors. I understand you're in the market for a new vehicle." Elizabeth paused. Lakeside Motors. The dealership she had briefly considered after her experience at Prestige Auto Gallery. She hadn't called them, hadn't reached out, so how did they know about her? "Yes," she replied slowly, her voice steady. "I am." "But how did you?" "I'm actually following up on an inquiry we received through a mutual contact," Sarah interrupted. "Your husband, William Collins, mentioned that you might be interested in the Crown Victoria Sovereign." I wanted to see if we could assist you further. Elizabeth's eyebrows furrowed. My husband mentioned it? I didn't think he'd said anything to anyone about it. Sarah's tone shifted slightly, more understanding now. He hasn't, directly. But when we heard about your experience with Prestige Auto Gallery, we thought it would be the right time to reach out. We value our customers, Miss Collins, and we want to make sure you're treated with the respect you deserve. Elizabeth felt a flush of warmth, the sincerity in Sarah's voice refreshing after the cold indifference she had experienced just days earlier. She had heard good things about Lakeside Motors, and now, hearing that they wanted to help her find the right car, without any assumptions or judgments, it made all the difference. I appreciate you reaching out, Elizabeth said, her voice calm but with a slight edge of gratitude. I've been thinking about my experience at Prestige, and I'd like to see what you can offer. Sarah was quick to respond. Of course. We have the Crown Victoria Sovereign in stock, and we also have a few other options that might suit your needs. I'd be happy to schedule an appointment for you to come by and see them in person. We pride ourselves on providing a more personalized, respectful experience. Elizabeth thought for a moment. A personalized, respectful experience. The very things she had been denied only days before. It felt like a breath of fresh air. Let's schedule an appointment, Elizabeth said, her decision made. I'd like to see what you have available. After hanging up, she felt a sense of relief wash over her. This wasn't just about buying a car anymore. It was about finding a place that respected her, where she wasn't judged based on her appearance or assumptions about her life. The feeling that had been lingering since her visit to Prestige was finally starting to dissipate, replaced with a sense of hope that maybe, just maybe, there were places where real customer service still existed. The morning of her appointment at Lakeside Motors, Elizabeth found herself feeling a mix of anticipation and cautious optimism. She had driven past the dealership a few times before, but today felt different. The atmosphere seemed calmer, less intimidating than the luxury showroom she had walked into just days earlier. As she approached the dealership, her mind couldn't help but wander back to the moment she had walked into Prestige Auto Gallery, the looks, the dismissive attitude, the assumption that she didn't belong. But here, at Lakeside Motors, she felt like she was entering a different world altogether. The building itself was unassuming, nestled on a quieter street away from the glitzy part of the city. It had an inviting charm, with large windows that showcased a well-curated selection of vehicles, yet nothing screamed exclusivity. Instead, it felt more like a place where people came for genuine service, not just to show off their wealth. As she parked her car and stepped out, Elizabeth felt a deep breath of relief. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew one thing for certain: she was no longer just another customer, she was a person. Walking into the dealership, she was greeted immediately by a warm smile from a woman behind the reception desk. Good morning. How can I help you today? Elizabeth returned the smile, grateful for the immediate friendliness. I have an appointment with Sarah Jenkins, she said, her voice steady. I'm here to look at the Crown Victoria Sovereign. The receptionist's smile grew even warmer. Of course, Miss Collins. Let me get Sarah for you. She's expecting you. A few moments later, Sarah Jenkins appeared from behind a door, her professional demeanor immediately apparent. But unlike the cold distance Elizabeth had encountered at Prestige, Sarah's expression was open, her smile genuine. She was dressed in a smart, but approachable outfit, professional, yet not intimidating. Miss Collins, it's so good to see you, Sarah said as she extended a hand. I'm glad you could make it in. We've got a few models I think you'll love, but I'm sure you already have some ideas of what you're looking for. I do, Elizabeth replied, shaking Sarah's hand firmly. I've been doing a lot of research on the Crown Victoria Sovereign. I'm really interested in the hybrid model, with the safety features and the eco-friendly design. Sarah nodded, leading Elizabeth toward the line of cars in the showroom. I think you'll be impressed. The Sovereign is one of our top models for a reason: performance, safety, and efficiency. And it's got a great reputation for being environmentally conscious, too. Let me show you the specifics. As they walked, Sarah continued to speak with enthusiasm, but there was a refreshing lack of pressure in her tone. It wasn't the typical hard sell Elizabeth had experienced at other dealerships. She was just there to help, to answer questions, and to give Elizabeth the space she needed to make her own decisions. They reached the Sovereign, a sleek golden sedan that glistened under the showroom lights. Elizabeth felt a small flutter of excitement in her chest. This was the moment. The car she had researched so thoroughly, the one that ticked all the boxes. She ran her fingers along the fender, admiring the smooth finish. It felt right. I've read a lot about this car, Elizabeth said as she turned to Sarah. It's exactly what I've been looking for. Safe, efficient, and environmentally friendly. And it doesn't hurt that it's got a bit of a luxurious touch, too. Sarah smiled, clearly pleased that Elizabeth was so well informed. You're exactly right. The Sovereign's design is top tier, and the hybrid technology is some of the best in the market right now. If you'd like, I can walk you through all the options, and we can even schedule a test drive. Elizabeth hesitated for a moment. I'm not here to just window shop, she said, her voice steady but clear. I'm serious about making a purchase today. I know what I want. Sarah's eyes brightened. That's exactly what we like to hear. No games, no pressure. Let's take a closer look at the details and make sure everything matches your expectations. As Sarah began to explain the various features of the car, Elizabeth felt a sense of calm settle over her. Here, there was no rush, no assumptions. She wasn't being sized up based on how she looked or what she wore. She was simply another customer, someone who had done her homework and was now ready to make a decision. It felt like a breath of fresh air compared to her experience just days ago. As Sarah finished explaining the features of the Sovereign, Elizabeth couldn't help but feel reassured. This wasn't just about the car, it was about the way she was being treated. There was no condescension, no judgment. Just a simple, straightforward conversation between two people who were there to get things done. I've looked at the warranty details, Elizabeth said, glancing at the brochure Sarah had handed her. And I'm impressed with the coverage. What about the hybrid battery system? How long does it last? Sarah nodded, already prepared for the question. The battery is covered for 8 years or 100,000 miles, whichever comes first. It's one of the best warranties in the industry. And the vehicle's efficiency is top-notch. It's designed to save you both on fuel and maintenance costs over time. Elizabeth made a mental note, ticking off another box on her checklist. She'd done plenty of research before coming in, but hearing Sarah's confidence and knowledge made her feel even more certain about her decision. I like the fact that the car is both luxurious and practical, Elizabeth said, her voice calm but filled with genuine enthusiasm. It's not just a status symbol. It aligns with my values. Sarah's expression softened, clearly understanding where Elizabeth was coming from. Exactly. A lot of people want a car that's not just about showing off, they want something that works for their lifestyle. And the Sovereign offers that balance of luxury and responsibility. It's not just for people who want to impress, it's for people who want to make smart, informed choices. Elizabeth smiled. She couldn't remember the last time a salesperson had spoken to her like that. It wasn't about closing a sale, it was about meeting her needs and values. She appreciated that. After a few more minutes of discussion, Elizabeth felt confident in her choice. She was ready. I think this is the one, she said firmly. I'm ready to move forward. Sarah's face lit up with a sincere smile. I'm so glad to hear that. Let me get the paperwork started, and we can finalize everything. As they walked to the back office, Elizabeth's thoughts raced. It wasn't just about buying a car, it was about reclaiming her sense of worth. After the experience at Prestige Auto Gallery, this felt like a victory, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever been judged by their appearance. She had stood up for herself and had chosen a dealership that saw her for who she truly was, not what she wore. Thank you, Sarah, Elizabeth said as they sat down at the desk. This has been exactly the kind of experience I was looking for. Sarah smiled again, clearly pleased. It's been a pleasure working with you, Miss Collins. We pride ourselves on making every customer feel valued and respected. Elizabeth nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. She didn't just feel respected, she felt like a partner in the process. She wasn't a customer to be sized up, she was a person with needs and desires, and Sarah had listened. It was a small thing, but it meant the world. A few minutes later, Sarah handed her the paperwork. All set. If you're ready to move forward, we can finalize everything today, and we can even schedule your delivery at your convenience. Elizabeth felt a surge of excitement. The decision had been made. The car was hers. Let's do it, she said, signing the paperwork without hesitation. As they wrapped up the paperwork, Elizabeth felt a sense of pride in her decision. Not just the car, but the way this process had unfolded. She had taken control, made her own choice, and chosen a place that valued her, not because of her bank account, but because of who she was. As she walked out of Lakeside Motors, her steps were lighter. She wasn't just leaving with a car, she was leaving with a sense of accomplishment. She had taken a stand, and it had paid off. The entire experience at Lakeside had been everything she had hoped for, and more. Driving away in her new Crown Victoria Sovereign, Elizabeth reflected on the journey that had led her here. The confrontation with Dalton, the frustration with Prestige, and now this, the sense of respect and fairness she had found at Lakeside Motors. It wasn't just about a luxury purchase, it was about making choices that aligned with her values and standing firm in what she believed. As she merged onto the highway, Elizabeth couldn't help but smile. This was a new beginning, not just in the car she was driving, but in the way she would approach the world moving forward. She was no longer afraid to stand up for herself and demand the respect she deserved. And that, she realized, was the real victory. A week had passed since Elizabeth's visit to Lakeside Motors, and the buzz around her purchase hadn't died down. Every time she saw the new Crown Victoria Sovereign parked in her driveway, she felt a quiet sense of pride. It wasn't just the car itself, it was what the decision represented. She had stood up for herself, for her values, and the universe had responded in kind. The simple act of choosing where to spend her money, and how to be treated in the process, had shifted something inside her. It wasn't just about getting a luxury car. It was about owning her decisions. William had noticed the change too. Since the incident at Prestige Auto Gallery, she had seemed more confident, more comfortable in her own skin. He hadn't brought it up directly, but she saw the way his eyes lingered on her sometimes, a mix of admiration and curiosity. One evening, as they sat down for dinner, William raised the topic. "You've been different lately," he said casually, his fork paused in midair. "Not in a bad way, just more yourself." Elizabeth smiled, her thoughts drifting briefly to that day at Lakeside. "I've been thinking about it a lot," she replied. "About what happened with Prestige and how I handled it. I guess it's given me a lot of clarity." William raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Clarity about what?" "About the way I want to be treated," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "And about how important it is to stand up for myself. Not just in big moments, but in all the little ones, too. I've always been independent, but it's more than that. It's about how we let others treat us. We can't change what other people do, but we can choose how we respond to it." William nodded slowly, his eyes meeting hers with a newfound understanding. "You've always been independent, Elizabeth. But I think you're realizing something that a lot of people miss. It's not just about doing things on your own. It's about knowing when to take a stand, and when to ask for what you deserve." She could see the pride in his eyes, and it warmed her heart. It wasn't just about the car or the confrontation anymore, it was about the shift in her mindset, her willingness to demand respect without apology. Later that week, Elizabeth received an unexpected call from Sarah Jenkins at Lakeside Motors. The sound of Sarah's voice brought a smile to her face. Miss Collins, I hope you're enjoying the Sovereign, Sarah said warmly. I just wanted to follow up and make sure everything's going smoothly. I also wanted to personally thank you for choosing us. We truly appreciate your business. Elizabeth smiled, leaning back in her chair as she spoke. Everything's great, Sarah. I'm really happy with the car. I've been telling everyone about how different the experience was at Lakeside compared to other dealerships. Sarah laughed, a light, genuine sound. That's exactly the kind of feedback we love to hear. And I've heard some interesting things around here lately. Elizabeth's curiosity piqued. What do you mean? Well, there's been some buzz about your visit to Prestige Auto Gallery, Sarah said. Apparently, a few people have heard about how you handled the situation. Word's been getting around, and it seems like it made quite an impression. Elizabeth's stomach tightened slightly. She hadn't expected her interaction with Dalton and Mr. Reynolds to ripple out this far. What kind of impression? The right kind, from what I understand, Sarah replied. People here really respect the way you stood your ground, and honestly, it's giving us even more motivation to keep pushing forward with the work we're doing here, making sure all our customers are treated with the respect they deserve, no matter what they're wearing or who they are. Elizabeth felt a mix of pride and surprise. She hadn't expected her actions to have this kind of impact, especially outside of the dealership. I didn't realize it was making that much of a difference, she said, her voice quiet with reflection. It's definitely making waves, Miss Collins, Sarah said. And I wanted to thank you again for being such a strong advocate for change. Whether you knew it or not, your decision has inspired a lot of us around here. We're really committed to improving, and you've played a part in that. Elizabeth sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the weight of Sarah's words. She had done what she thought was right, but to hear that her actions had been noticed and had sparked change, well, that felt like something entirely different. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about creating a shift, a movement toward treating people with dignity and respect, no matter where they came from or what they wore. Well, Elizabeth said finally, I'm glad to have made a difference, even if I didn't know it would be this far-reaching. It feels good to know that standing up for myself can lead to something bigger. As Elizabeth hung up the phone, a deep sense of satisfaction settled over her. She hadn't set out to be a trailblazer, but it seemed that's exactly what had happened. She had taken a stand for herself, and now, her actions were echoing through the very systems that had once judged her. It felt empowering, even if it had all started with a simple desire for respect during a car purchase. The next day, Elizabeth received another unexpected message. This time, it was from someone she hadn't expected to hear from, Dalton, the senior salesman from Prestige Auto Gallery. The text came in the form of a formal apology, which felt strange considering how their last interaction had unfolded. But what struck her wasn't just the message itself, it was the tone. Dalton, Miss Collins, I want to sincerely apologize for the way you were treated during your visit to Prestige Auto Gallery. I recognize that my behavior was inappropriate, and I deeply regret the judgment I passed on you. Please know that we are taking steps to ensure that this does not happen again. I hope you will accept my apologies and that we can have the opportunity to serve you better in the future. Elizabeth read the message twice, unsure how to feel. Part of her wanted to dismiss it outright. The apology didn't erase what had happened. But another part of her felt a strange sense of closure. Dalton's apology, though late, acknowledged the impact of his actions. It wasn't enough to undo the damage, but it was a start. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she sat with it, thinking about how far she had come in just a few days. The act of standing up for herself had triggered something in others, and it wasn't just about cars or salesmen anymore. It was about shifting perspectives, challenging assumptions, and fighting for the respect everyone deserved, regardless of their appearance. Later that afternoon, Elizabeth decided to take a walk through her favorite neighborhood park. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the lake as she made her way along the path. It was her time to think, to clear her mind, and reflect. As she walked, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was from Kevin, the young salesman from Prestige Auto Gallery who had shown her genuine respect when no one else did. Kevin, hi, Miss Collins. I just wanted to thank you for your kindness during our interaction at Prestige Auto Gallery. I know things got tense, but your decision to stick to your values made a big impression on me. I admire the way you handled everything. I'm now working at Lakeside Motors, and I'd love to help you with anything in the future. Elizabeth smiled at the text. She hadn't expected to hear from Kevin, but his message touched her. She had known from the start that he wasn't like the others at Prestige. He had treated her with respect from the moment they met, and now it seemed he was on a different path too, one that aligned with the values she had fought for. Elizabeth, thank you, Kevin. I really appreciate your message. I'm glad you're at Lakeside Motors now. It sounds like the change is exactly what you were looking for. She felt a sense of validation with Kevin's message, a confirmation that standing up for what was right didn't just benefit her, it inspired others to do the same. In some ways, her decision to speak up had created a ripple effect, touching not just the dealership but also the people working there who might have felt stuck in a system that didn't treat everyone fairly. Elizabeth continued her walk, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. It wasn't just about making a purchase, it was about creating a shift in how people viewed each other. How they saw worth, value, and respect. The following week, Elizabeth was invited to a small gathering by Sarah Jenkins at Lakeside Motors. It was a casual event to introduce a new lineup of vehicles, but Sarah had specifically invited Elizabeth, knowing she was a valued customer. Elizabeth had never been one to attend such events, but something told her this one would be different. She wasn't just a customer here, she was part of a community that valued integrity and respect. When she arrived at the dealership, she was greeted like a VIP, but it didn't feel forced or patronizing. It felt sincere. Sarah introduced her to several team members, all of whom greeted her with warmth and genuine interest. The atmosphere was different, light, welcoming, and focused on the customer's needs, not just the sale. After mingling with a few people, Elizabeth noticed Kevin across the room, talking to a couple about one of the cars. He smiled when he saw her, and she returned the gesture. As the evening wore on, Sarah approached Elizabeth. You know, she said, her voice low, we've been talking about how much of an impact your visit has had on the dealership. You've really given us something to think about. It's not just about selling cars, it's about creating an environment where people feel respected. Elizabeth's heart warmed at Sarah's words. I'm just glad I could be part of something positive, she said simply. You've already made a difference, Sarah replied. And we're committed to making sure that change sticks. As Elizabeth made her way back to her car later that evening, she couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. The ripple effect she had started was just the beginning, but it was already making waves. She had stood up for herself, and in doing so, she had inspired others to do the same. It wasn't about the car anymore, it was about something far bigger. It was about creating a culture of respect and dignity, one step at a time. Elizabeth sat at her desk the following Monday morning, a cup of coffee in hand as she reviewed emails and project updates. The office was quiet, the usual hum of the city filtering through the windows as she went about her work. But despite the routine of the day, her mind kept drifting back to the events of the past week, the car purchase, the conversation with Sarah, and the ripple effect her actions had set into motion. She had expected some kind of resolution after standing up for herself, but what she hadn't anticipated was how deeply it would change her own perspective, as well as the way others viewed her. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from William. William, I talked to a couple of clients today, and they mentioned the story. It's been circulating a bit, huh? Looks like you've made more of an impact than you thought. Elizabeth smiled at the text. She hadn't expected the incident at Prestige Auto Gallery to spread, but it seemed that word had traveled fast. She had spoken up for herself, but the fact that others were now acknowledging her actions made her realize just how important it was to take a stand, even in the smallest of ways. Elizabeth, it's surprising, honestly. But I'm glad it's making a difference. It's not just about me anymore, it's about everyone who's ever felt dismissed or overlooked. She paused before adding, it feels like things are shifting, in a good way. William's response came almost immediately. I'm proud of you. It's more than just the car. You've given people something to think about. Elizabeth set her phone down and leaned back in her chair, her thoughts turning inward. She had been motivated to speak out for herself in the moment, but now it was clear to her that there was more at stake than just one experience in a car dealership. She had tapped into a much deeper issue, how society judged people based on appearances, assumptions, and biases. The problem wasn't just about luxury cars or the elitism in sales, it was the broader societal pattern that needed to change. Her phone buzzed again, this time with an email from Sarah Jenkins at Lakeside Motors. Elizabeth opened it, curious. Sarah, hi Elizabeth, I hope you're doing well. I wanted to thank you once again for your trust in us and for making such a strong statement with your actions. It's been inspiring for our team, and I'm pleased to share that we've begun the process of implementing some of the changes we discussed. We're also starting a new initiative to further educate our team about respecting all customers, regardless of their background or appearance. I'll keep you posted on how things progress. Elizabeth's heart warmed as she read Sarah's words. She hadn't expected this kind of follow-up. Sarah had been upfront and genuine from the beginning, but now, knowing that the dealership was taking action in response to her visit made her feel like her efforts weren't just seen, they were valued. Elizabeth, thank you, Sarah. I'm really glad to hear that you're taking those steps. It's more than just a sale, it's about changing the way we approach service and respect. I'm happy to have been part of that. As Elizabeth hit send, she thought about the impact of her actions. It wasn't just about her moment of confrontation with Dalton or her decision to buy a car at Lakeside. It was the way those decisions had sparked a larger conversation, not just in one dealership, but within her own life, her relationships, and even in the business community around her. People were talking, reflecting, and, hopefully, changing. But as much as she felt proud of the progress she had made, Elizabeth knew that this was only the beginning. It wasn't enough to have one conversation or to make one statement, this was a long game, and change took time. She couldn't expect the world to transform overnight, but she could continue to be part of the shift, however small it might seem. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at her office door. She looked up to see her colleague, Marcus, standing in the doorway, a curious expression on his face. Hey, Elizabeth, he said, stepping in. I heard about what happened with that car dealership. Pretty impressive stuff. I have to say, you've inspired me to take a closer look at how I handle situations like that. You're not just standing up for yourself, you're standing up for all of us. Elizabeth felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. Marcus had always been supportive, but hearing his words made her realize that her actions had reached beyond the people she knew intimately. Her stand had sparked something in others, too. Thanks, Marcus, she said, her voice sincere. It's not about making a big show, it's about being honest, not letting things slide just because it's easier. I'm glad it's making an impact, even if it's small. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. It's not small. It's big. You've started a conversation that needed to be had. As he left her office, Elizabeth couldn't help but smile. She hadn't expected to become some kind of spokesperson for change, but it seemed that her decision had given others the courage to think about how they, too, could challenge the status quo. Maybe it wasn't just about her standing up for herself, it was about all of them standing up for something better. Later that evening, Elizabeth and William went out for dinner at their favorite neighborhood bistro. It was their quiet spot, nothing fancy, just good food, cozy lighting, and a place where they could talk without interruption. As they settled into their usual booth near the window, William reached for the wine list, but his eyes lingered on her a moment longer than usual. You've always been strong, he said, folding the menu shut, but lately you've been louder with it. In a good way. Elizabeth tilted her head, a soft smile forming. Louder? I mean it as a compliment, he said quickly, laughing. You've always had convictions, but now you're more willing to make them known. You're not just standing firm, you're standing forward. She took a sip of her water, considering his words. I think I finally stopped worrying about being polite all the time. Or being underestimated. I just got tired of people assuming I was less because I wasn't flashy or loud about who I am. William leaned forward slightly. And now? Now, she said, I'm done shrinking myself to make others comfortable. That doesn't mean I want to be confrontational, it just means I'm not going to stay quiet when something matters. Their conversation was interrupted when a couple at the next table leaned over. Sorry to bother you, the woman said, offering a friendly smile, but are you Elizabeth Collins? Elizabeth blinked, surprised. Yes. I recognized you from the story making its way around, the woman continued. Someone shared what happened at that dealership on a local forum. It really stuck with me, how you didn't let them talk down to you and how you turned it into something positive. I just wanted to say, thank you. It was inspiring. Elizabeth was caught off guard, but she quickly recovered. Thank you, she said with a warm, grateful smile. I appreciate that more than you know. After the couple returned to their meal, William looked at her with raised eyebrows. You're a bit of a local hero now, huh? Elizabeth laughed, shaking her head. Let's not get carried away. But if it helps people see things differently, if it helps someone stand up for themselves when they wouldn't have before, then it's worth it. As dinner continued, so did their conversation. They spoke about what might come next, not just in their personal lives, but in the broader context of how Elizabeth's experience might open doors for future advocacy. William floated the idea of her writing a piece about her experience, maybe even sharing it with a publication or blog that focused on consumer rights or women's empowerment. Elizabeth hesitated at first. I don't know. I'm not a writer. You're a storyteller, he corrected. You told your story in that dealership. You tell it in how you carry yourself. Writing it down? That's just another way to keep the conversation going. Later that night, as they returned home, Elizabeth stood on the balcony of their apartment, the city lights sparkling below. She felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, not just peace, but purpose. A turning point had come, not just in how others saw her, but in how she saw herself. She was no longer afraid to speak, no longer content to be silent in the face of disrespect or dismissal. And as she stood there, overlooking the city, she realized she was ready. Ready to take her voice beyond the showroom floor. Ready to help others find their own. The story wasn't over, it was just beginning. The following weeks were a whirlwind for Elizabeth. The ripple effect of her actions continued to unfold, far beyond what she could have imagined. It wasn't just the people in her immediate circle who were talking about her visit to Lakeside Motors or the stand she'd taken at Prestige Auto Gallery, it was spreading to a broader audience. Friends, colleagues, and even strangers were reaching out to express their appreciation. Some wanted advice, others simply wanted to share their own stories of being overlooked or judged, just like she had been. One afternoon, as Elizabeth sat at her desk in the office, she received an email from an editor at a popular online magazine, one she had never interacted with before. The subject line simply read, "We'd love to feature your story." She opened it hesitantly, unsure of what to expect. Dear Ms. Collins, I hope this message finds you well. My name is Samantha Rivers, and I'm a writer for Magazine Name, a publication that focuses on empowering voices, challenging stereotypes, and bringing attention to the issues that often get overlooked. We recently came across your story regarding your experience at Prestige Auto Gallery and your decision to make a change by purchasing from Lakeside Motors. We'd love to feature your story in an upcoming issue. We believe your message of self-advocacy and empowerment is exactly the kind of voice our readers need to hear. If you're interested, we'd love to schedule an interview to discuss your experience further. Looking forward to hearing from you. Samantha Rivers. Editor, Magazine Name. Elizabeth sat back in her chair, her mind racing. She had never thought about her experience in such a grand context. She was just someone trying to buy a car. But now, it seemed her actions had sparked something much bigger. A magazine, one with a wide audience, wanted to hear her story and share it with the world. The moment of uncertainty she had felt earlier now seemed distant. This was the kind of platform she had been looking for, a chance to reach even more people, to inspire them the way she had been inspired to stand up for herself. After taking a few moments to process the email, she typed out a reply. Dear Ms. Rivers, thank you for reaching out. I'm honored that you want to feature my story. I believe in the power of standing up for oneself and challenging assumptions, and if my experience can help someone else feel empowered, then I'm happy to share it. I would love to schedule an interview and discuss my journey further. Looking forward to speaking with you. Elizabeth Collins. After hitting send, Elizabeth couldn't help but smile. She had taken a small step toward reclaiming her voice, and now it seemed that step was turning into a movement. She had no idea where this would lead, but she felt ready for whatever came next. A few days later, Elizabeth sat down with Samantha Rivers via video call. The interview itself was casual, Samantha was professional but kind, and Elizabeth found herself speaking openly about the events that had unfolded. She spoke about her initial hesitations, her research into the sovereign, and how the treatment she received at Prestige had ignited something in her. It wasn't just about buying a car, it was about recognizing her worth, even when others failed to see it. The truth is, Elizabeth said during the interview, I never expected to be the person who would stand up for herself in that way. I've always been independent, but I was also taught to keep things quiet, not to make waves. But when I realized how people like me, regular people, are dismissed based on assumptions, I knew it was time to make a change. I couldn't just sit back and accept it anymore. Samantha nodded, taking notes as Elizabeth spoke. And that's exactly what made your story resonate with so many people, she said. You didn't just change your own experience, you helped others find their voice. That's powerful. As the interview came to a close, Elizabeth felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. She had shared more than she thought she would, but the process had been cathartic. Speaking openly about her experience had allowed her to reflect on just how far she had come. What had started as a small, personal battle had evolved into something much more profound, a turning point in her own life, and a chance to help others recognize their own worth. After the call, Elizabeth sat quietly for a moment, letting everything sink in. The magazine article would be published in a few weeks, but this was just one step on her journey. She had no idea what was next, but she knew that speaking up had opened a door she wasn't about to close. It wasn't just about advocating for herself anymore, it was about advocating for everyone who had ever felt dismissed or overlooked. As the weeks passed, Elizabeth's story gained more and more traction. The article in the magazine came out on schedule, and the response was overwhelming. She received messages from strangers, women, men, and even businesses, thanking her for sharing her experience. They spoke about how her words had helped them confront their own challenges, how her decision to stand up had inspired them to do the same in their own lives. It wasn't just about cars anymore, it was about a shift in how people viewed respect, assumptions, and the power of standing up for oneself. But with this new attention came new challenges. Elizabeth found herself navigating a fine line between her personal life and the increasing public interest in her story. Her social media accounts, once reserved for friends and family, became platforms for others to reach out to her, share their experiences, and seek advice. At first, it felt surreal, like she was living in a world that didn't quite match the quiet, grounded life she had always known. But as the weeks went on, Elizabeth realized how important this moment was, not just for herself, but for the people who now saw her as a voice for something bigger. One afternoon, as she sat down to go through her emails, she received a message from an executive at Prestige Auto Gallery. She hesitated for a moment, wondering what it might contain. After everything that had happened, she wasn't sure she wanted to hear from them. But curiosity got the best of her, and she opened the message. Subject: a sincere apology and request for dialogue. Dear Ms. Collins, I hope this message finds you well. I'm writing to personally apologize for the incident that occurred during your visit to Prestige Auto Gallery. I understand that our handling of your experience was completely unacceptable, and I deeply regret the way our staff treated you. I realize that actions speak louder than words, and we are currently working on implementing changes to ensure that this never happens again. I would appreciate the opportunity to meet with you in person to discuss this matter further. Your feedback is invaluable, and we want to make things right. I look forward to hearing from you. Best regards. John L. Wallace, Senior Executive, Prestige Auto Gallery. Elizabeth read the email twice, her mind racing. She had expected some form of apology from the dealership, but this felt different. The tone was sincere, acknowledging their wrongdoings without trying to shift blame. For a moment, she wondered if this was part of their attempt to salvage their reputation, but then she realized it wasn't just about them anymore. It was about whether they were genuinely willing to change or if it was just another public relations move. After a few moments of contemplation, Elizabeth made her decision. She replied, agreeing to meet with John Wallace, but only under the condition that the conversation would be focused on the concrete steps they were taking to address the issues she had raised. If they were serious about making real changes, this would be the opportunity to find out. The meeting was scheduled for the following week. As Elizabeth prepared for the conversation, she felt a strange mixture of anticipation and skepticism. She had already stood her ground once. Would it be enough to do it again, especially with the eyes of others watching her? When the day arrived, Elizabeth walked into Prestige Auto Gallery once more, but this time, she was in control. She wasn't the hesitant woman from the first visit, unsure of herself and out of place. She was the woman who had made waves, who had spoken out and sparked change. She felt the power of that transformation as she walked through the familiar glass doors. John Wallace met her in the showroom, his face a mixture of professionalism and apology. They shook hands, and he led her to a private office. The room felt sterile, with polished surfaces and minimal decor, but it didn't matter. Elizabeth wasn't there for pleasantries. She was there to hear what had changed. As they sat down, John didn't waste any time. Miss Collins, I want to start by saying that I deeply regret how you were treated during your visit here. The actions of my staff were unacceptable, and I understand the frustration and anger that caused you. We've been working on implementing changes to our training program to ensure that all customers are treated with dignity, regardless of their appearance or background. Elizabeth listened carefully, but her skepticism lingered. And what does that look like, exactly? What are you doing to change, beyond the words? John nodded, understanding the weight of her question. We're working on a full-scale retraining of all our employees, from the sales staff to the management team. We're also implementing new guidelines for how we interact with customers, making sure that respect and empathy are at the forefront of every conversation. I also want to personally take responsibility for the culture that allowed this to happen in the first place. It's clear we have a lot of work to do. Elizabeth felt the sincerity in his words, but she remained cautious. That's a start, she said. But it's not enough just to change how you treat people inside the showroom. You need to challenge the underlying assumptions that lead to these problems. I wasn't just judged for my appearance, I was judged because people assumed I didn't belong in a space like this. John's expression softened. I understand, and that's why we're looking at the bigger picture. It's not just about training, it's about changing the way we approach the very concept of customer service. We're committed to making those deeper changes. Elizabeth paused for a moment, considering his words. I hope this isn't just for show. I hope you're really committed to creating a culture of respect. We are, John said, his voice firm. And I want to thank you for giving us the chance to make it right. Your voice has had a bigger impact than you might realize. You've forced us to look at ourselves, and we're committed to doing better. As Elizabeth stood to leave, she felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the complete overhaul she had envisioned, but it was a step in the right direction. The conversation had begun, and with it, the opportunity for real change. The weeks following Elizabeth's meeting with John Wallace were marked by a series of small yet significant shifts. The conversation with Prestige Auto Gallery, while just one step, had triggered a ripple effect. Elizabeth could feel it, even in the subtle changes in how she interacted with people, at work, with friends, and even with strangers. There was a newfound sense of purpose in her actions, a quiet confidence that had grown out of her willingness to speak up, to demand respect not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been dismissed based on assumptions. Lakeside Motors had continued to be a place of positive reinforcement, where Elizabeth's decision to choose them had been validated not just by her experience, but by the ongoing commitment they had shown to treating all customers with respect. Sarah had kept her updated on their progress with employee training, sharing stories of how they were actively changing the culture within the dealership. The small steps were adding up, and Elizabeth was beginning to see the tangible results of the conversation she had started. But not all the changes were visible, and some of them took more time to unfold. Elizabeth knew that the work she had set in motion, challenging societal expectations, questioning biases, and advocating for respect, wasn't something that could be completed overnight. She had pushed for change in a singular moment, but true transformation would take time. She was prepared for that. One evening, as she sat at home with William, reflecting on the whirlwind of activity that had followed her article and the attention it had garnered, Elizabeth found herself reflecting on the bigger picture. She had started with a single action, a small but significant decision to assert herself in a space where she felt unwelcome. But what about the rest of the world? What about all the other spaces where people, especially women, and especially those from marginalized backgrounds, felt out of place, judged before they even had a chance to speak? She glanced up from her phone, where she had been reading through some of the messages and comments that had continued to pour in from the article. "Do you think this kind of thing could spread beyond just a few dealerships?" she asked William. "Like, could it really change how businesses treat people overall?" William leaned back in his chair, considering the question. "I think it's possible. Everything starts with a conversation, right? What you did got people talking. It's creating a ripple, and ripples spread. Sure, it's a slow process, but every time someone reads your story or hears about it, it plants a seed." Elizabeth smiled, though there was a hint of uncertainty in her eyes. "I'm just one person. I don't have the resources or platform to really make a huge change." "That's not true," William said gently, leaning forward to take her hand. "You've already made a huge change. And now, people are listening. You're already influencing how people think about things. You don't need a platform the size of a corporation to change the way individuals view respect and equality. You've already done that." The conversation settled in Elizabeth's mind as she fell asleep that night. William was right, she thought. She had started a conversation, and even though it wasn't over yet, the impact was real. The article, the attention from Lakeside Motors, even the apology from Prestige, those were all pieces of a much larger movement, one that she wasn't sure how to navigate just yet, but one that felt undeniably important. In the coming days, Elizabeth received more messages from people, strangers, customers, even business owners, who wanted to share their own experiences or discuss ways to make their spaces more inclusive. Some of them had been inspired by her story, others were simply looking for advice. Elizabeth did her best to respond to each one, offering encouragement and sharing her thoughts on the importance of standing up and speaking out. But as she read through more of these messages, she realized something: the work had only just begun. There were so many more stories out there, stories of people who had been dismissed or underestimated, people who didn't have the platform to voice their struggles. Elizabeth knew that there was a larger opportunity here, one that would require more than just individual acts of standing up for oneself. It was about creating a collective voice, something bigger than any one person. As Elizabeth continued to reflect on the messages she had received, a thought began to form in the back of her mind. She knew she had sparked something, But what if this could be more than just a series of isolated moments? What if she could create something larger, a movement, an initiative, a platform where others could share their experiences and advocate for themselves the way she had? The idea lingered with her for days, and she began to research organizations and initiatives that had already made waves in similar spaces. There were nonprofit groups, community organizations, and online platforms that focused on equality, respect, and empowerment. But none of them, as far as she could see, quite captured the spirit of what she wanted to create. She wanted a space that wasn't just about advocating for the underrepresented, it was about empowering people to take control of their own narratives, to stand up against the bias and prejudice that shaped so much of their lives. It wasn't going to be easy. Starting something from scratch required time, resources, and more energy than she felt she had to give. But there was a fire inside her now, a fire that had been ignited by her experience at the dealership and fanned by the positive changes that followed. Elizabeth wasn't just a bystander anymore. She was ready to step into a leadership role, ready to fight for something bigger than herself. A few weeks after her initial idea began to take shape, Elizabeth started drafting a plan. She researched social media platforms, wrote out a mission statement, and considered the logistics of what it would take to bring something like this to life. She even began talking to people in her network who could offer advice, from branding experts to lawyers who could help her with nonprofit structure and regulations. The project began to take on a life of its own. "I'm thinking about starting something," she told William one evening as they sat in their living room. "Something that brings together the voices of people who have been overlooked, dismissed, or judged based on assumptions." William leaned forward, clearly intrigued. "What kind of something?" "I don't know exactly yet," Elizabeth replied, tapping her pen against her notepad. "But I want it to be a place where people can share their stories, get advice, and support each other. Maybe even get involved in advocacy or change initiatives that focus on social justice, equity, and respect for all." "Wow," William said, his voice filled with admiration. "That's huge. Are you sure you're ready for something like that?" Elizabeth paused for a moment, contemplating his question. "No, I'm not sure," she admitted. "But I think I'm more ready than I've ever been." The next few months were filled with long days and nights of planning. Elizabeth kept her day job, but in the evenings and weekends, she poured her heart into this new project. She started small, reaching out to a few like-minded individuals she knew through her work and personal life. She asked for advice, feedback, and support. Slowly, the idea gained traction, and her circle of supporters began to grow. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks along the way, moments of self-doubt, and countless challenges that seemed to pop up at every turn. She was balancing a full-time job, a new initiative, and the pressure of her growing public profile. But Elizabeth was determined. She reminded herself of the simple truth that had started her journey in the first place: change, no matter how small, was still change. And that was something worth fighting for. Through this process, Elizabeth found herself connecting with other advocates, community leaders, and even business owners who were equally passionate about creating spaces of respect and equity. Many of them had faced similar challenges and had been working towards similar goals in their own spheres of influence. Some had worked on policy changes, others had been focused on community building. But what united them all was the shared belief in the importance of respect for oneself and for others. The most profound moment came when Elizabeth received a message from a woman who had been one of the first to reach out to her after the article was published. The woman, Ava, had been struggling to find her voice in a male-dominated industry and had felt overlooked for years. After reading Elizabeth's story, she had found the courage to stand up for herself at work. Not only had she gotten the promotion she deserved, but she had also inspired others to do the same. Ava's message was simple, but it struck Elizabeth deeply. "Thank you. Your story gave me the strength to speak up for myself. I now feel empowered to continue advocating for myself and my colleagues. And now, because of you, I know I'm not alone in this fight." A smile spread across Elizabeth's face as she read Ava's words. This was the moment she had been working toward. She had set something in motion, a chain of events that was bigger than herself, and the ripple effect was continuing. The impact of one voice had sparked a wave of empowerment, and Elizabeth knew this was just the beginning. As she sat down at her desk the following day, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead was long, and she knew there would be more challenges, but she was no longer afraid. She had already taken the first step, and now, with the support of others, she was ready to keep moving forward, fighting for respect, equality, and the power of shared stories. Elizabeth sat in the small conference room, her hands folded in front of her as she listened to the group of advocates gathered around the table. The room was filled with energy, there was a palpable sense of momentum. The initiative she had started, the one that had begun with her decision to stand up at Prestige Auto Gallery, had evolved into something much larger than she could have imagined. What was once just a simple conversation about respect and customer treatment had now turned into a broader movement, one focused on creating spaces where everyone could feel valued, heard, and empowered. She glanced around at the diverse group of people sitting across from her, community leaders, fellow advocates, business owners, and even a few former clients who had been inspired by her story. The collective energy in the room was contagious, and Elizabeth felt the excitement build inside her as the conversation shifted to what came next. "We've done well so far," Sarah Jenkins said, her voice confident and steady. "But now it's time to think bigger. It's time to break beyond just the personal stories and focus on systemic change. We need to create lasting impact, not just individual wins." Elizabeth nodded. Sarah had been one of the first people she'd reached out to when she started brainstorming the initiative. Sarah's support, both professionally and personally, had been invaluable, and now her perspective on the next steps was shaping the direction of their work. "We have the attention now," Elizabeth said, her voice carrying across the room. "People are listening. But we can't just stop here. If we want to make a real difference, we need to start addressing the bigger issues: bias in businesses, inclusivity in leadership roles, and how society as a whole treats those who are often overlooked." The room fell quiet for a moment, the weight of Elizabeth's words sinking in. It was one thing to talk about personal victories, small moments of standing up for oneself, but it was another thing entirely to challenge the structures that allowed those moments of inequality to exist in the first place. "Exactly," said Marcus, one of the business owners involved in the initiative. "We've all had our own experiences with biases in our industries, but how do we start changing the way businesses approach hiring, training, and customer service? It's not just about raising awareness. It's about creating policies and frameworks that ensure this shift in mindset is permanent." Elizabeth felt a spark of inspiration. This was the next step, the hard work. The moment when they would move from abstract ideas to concrete action. She thought about the ways companies often promoted surface-level diversity, without addressing the deeper issues that kept certain groups from truly thriving in the workplace. She thought about her own experiences in her career, how she had been passed over for opportunities not because of her qualifications but because of assumptions made about her worth and capabilities. "We can start by pushing for better education on bias and inclusivity in corporate environments," Elizabeth suggested. "And not just a one-off seminar, but ongoing, integrated learning. It needs to be part of the company culture. We need to get leaders to understand that it's not enough to have diversity in numbers. It's about making sure everyone has a real opportunity to succeed, no matter their background." The conversation continued, each person adding their ideas and perspectives, but Elizabeth felt a sense of urgency growing inside her. This wasn't just a discussion anymore. This was the beginning of something that could change the way people viewed respect and equality in business and beyond. After the meeting, Elizabeth took a moment to reflect on the progress they had made. A year ago, she had been a single voice standing up to a dismissive salesman. Now, she was part of a growing movement, a collective effort to create change in a world that often overlooked the value of respect for all people. It was both humbling and exhilarating, but Elizabeth knew that they couldn't stop now. They had only just begun to scratch the surface. As she gathered her things and prepared to leave, Sarah came up to her, a thoughtful look on her face. "You know, Elizabeth," Sarah said quietly, "I think what you're doing is bigger than you realize. You've given people the tools to speak up for themselves, yes. But now you're helping them build something bigger, something that could make real, lasting change." Elizabeth smiled, grateful for Sarah's unwavering support. "I didn't expect this to become a movement," she said, the words tasting unfamiliar on her tongue. "But now that it is, I'm ready to keep pushing for change. We can't let this be just a moment. It has to be a movement." The weeks that followed were a blur of meetings, brainstorming sessions, and planning. Elizabeth found herself more and more immersed in the work of shaping their initiative into something concrete. The ideas they had discussed in the meeting began to take form, turning into tangible goals and strategies. The group was growing, and the mission was clear: to create an organization that not only advocated for fairness and equality but also put systems in place to ensure these values were woven into the fabric of businesses everywhere. The first step was securing partnerships with companies that were already committed to diversity and inclusion but wanted to do more. They needed allies, people who would champion the cause and demonstrate what true inclusivity looked like. Elizabeth and the team worked tirelessly, reaching out to potential partners, crafting proposals, and setting up meetings. Slowly but surely, they began to build momentum. One of the biggest breakthroughs came when they partnered with a national HR consulting firm that specialized in helping companies create inclusive workplace cultures. The firm had a track record of working with high-level executives to implement inclusive policies, but they had yet to fully tackle biases in customer-facing roles, the very thing Elizabeth was passionate about. This partnership gave them a direct line to the decision-makers who could help them make the changes they were seeking. "It's not just about having a few diverse faces in the room," Elizabeth said in a meeting with the firm's leadership. "It's about making sure that those faces aren't being treated as tokens. It's about ensuring people have real power and opportunities. We want to help companies go beyond diversity quotas and focus on creating true, lasting inclusion." The firm's leadership team was receptive, intrigued by Elizabeth's vision. After several meetings, they agreed to offer their services at a discounted rate to the initiative's partner companies, helping them design training programs and develop new policies. It was a step in the right direction, but Elizabeth knew they had to be careful. They weren't just changing policies on paper, they had to ensure those changes were implemented in a way that would actually shift the culture, not just check boxes. "Getting the right policies in place is just the start," Sarah reminded her one afternoon. "You need to make sure there's follow-through, making sure that what you're teaching becomes a part of the company's DNA." Elizabeth knew Sarah was right. It wasn't enough to just have the right words on paper. It was about changing behavior and creating accountability at every level. With that in mind, Elizabeth pushed for the next big step in their plan: an awareness campaign that would challenge companies to rethink their biases from the ground up. They needed to go beyond just offering training sessions, they needed to create a movement that involved the public. It had to be something that would encourage companies to hold themselves accountable in a way that was transparent and visible. The campaign, aptly named Respect Starts Here, launched with a powerful message: change had to come from within, and it had to be led by those with the power to shape company culture. Elizabeth and her team worked with marketing experts to craft compelling content for social media, using real stories of people who had been overlooked or undervalued. The campaign was simple but effective, highlighting the need for respect in business interactions, from the first point of contact all the way through to leadership. But as the campaign gained traction, Elizabeth began to feel the pressure mounting. She had started this journey as a single voice, but now she was leading a movement that was expanding far beyond what she had ever imagined. The responsibility felt both thrilling and overwhelming at times. Every decision she made impacted not just her own future but the future of countless people who were looking to her for leadership. There were nights when she lay awake, wondering if she was doing enough. The weight of the movement, the expectation of success, and the potential for failure all hung heavy on her shoulders. She had started this fight for respect because she wanted to ensure no one would ever feel dismissed the way she had, but now she had to make sure that vision became a reality on a much larger scale. One evening, as she and William sat down to dinner, Elizabeth was lost in thought. William, noticing her silence, gently asked, "Are you okay? You've been a little distant lately." Elizabeth smiled tiredly. "I'm just thinking about everything. The campaign, the partnerships, the momentum we've built. It's all coming together, but it's a lot of responsibility. Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing enough." William reached across the table, taking her hand. "Elizabeth, look at what you've already accomplished. You've built something from the ground up, and people are listening. You're already making a difference. You're not just doing enough, you're doing exactly what you were meant to do." She squeezed his hand, the weight of his words lifting a little of the burden she had been carrying. He was right. She had started this journey not knowing where it would lead, but now she could see the far-reaching impact it was having. The campaign had resonated with businesses, with employees, and with customers. More importantly, it was giving people the courage to take a stand for themselves and demand the respect they deserved. The journey was far from over, but in that moment, Elizabeth realized something important: she wasn't alone in this. She had a team of advocates, a community of supporters, and, most importantly, she had the strength to keep pushing forward. The launch of the Respect Starts Here campaign was a turning point in Elizabeth's journey. What began as an idea, something personal, an experience that had sparked a need for change, was now growing into something far larger than she had imagined. The campaign's success took on a life of its own, spreading like wildfire through businesses and communities alike. Media outlets began to pick up on the movement, and before long, Elizabeth found herself being interviewed by news outlets, podcasts, and even invited to speak at conferences. Her story, her voice, was reaching people in ways she hadn't expected, and it was opening doors to new opportunities. But with this newfound attention came a level of pressure she had never felt before. The spotlight, once something she had avoided, was now squarely on her, and it was hard to ignore the weight of it. Every conversation, every interview, felt like another test, another moment to prove that she was the right person to lead this movement. One evening, as Elizabeth sat at her desk, reviewing her notes for an upcoming speaking engagement, she felt a familiar wave of doubt wash over her. The success of the campaign had exceeded her expectations, but now, she couldn't help but wonder, was she truly prepared for everything that came with this new role? Was she capable of carrying the weight of it all? Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Sarah Jenkins. "Sarah, how are you holding up? I know it's been a lot lately, but I just wanted to remind you, this is exactly why we're doing this. You've built something incredible, and it's changing the conversation. But don't forget to take a breath and appreciate how far you've come." Elizabeth read the message and smiled, grateful for Sarah's constant support. It was easy to get lost in the hustle of it all and forget to take a step back and acknowledge the impact they were having. The weight of the responsibility was real, but so was the good they were doing. Taking a deep breath, Elizabeth put her phone down and looked out the window at the city skyline. She had always been someone who thrived behind the scenes, working quietly and making an impact without drawing too much attention to herself. But now, her story was becoming a symbol of empowerment, and her platform had grown in ways that she had never imagined. The question was no longer whether she could do it, it was whether she could continue to grow with the movement while staying true to who she was. The next morning, Elizabeth was scheduled to speak at a conference on workplace diversity and inclusion. It was one of the largest conferences of its kind, and she had been invited to join a panel of prominent advocates in the field. She had prepared extensively for this moment, but as she sat in the green room before the session began, she couldn't shake the feeling of being an imposter. She had never envisioned herself as a public speaker or a leader in this capacity. She was a woman who had been overlooked, dismissed, and judged for most of her life. But now, she was being asked to stand in front of a crowd of thousands and speak about topics that were larger than any single individual. She was expected to guide others toward change, and that responsibility felt heavier than ever. Her thoughts were interrupted when Sarah walked into the green room, offering her a warm smile. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world," Sarah said, her tone playful but with a hint of concern. "I feel like it," Elizabeth admitted, standing up and adjusting her blazer. "I know this is what I'm supposed to be doing, but it still feels surreal. Like, what if I don't have the answers they're looking for? What if I mess this up?" Sarah's expression softened. "Elizabeth, no one expects you to have all the answers. What people want to hear from you is your story, the real, raw, honest version of what this movement means to you and why it matters. You've already done the hard part. You started this because you saw something that needed to change, and now others are listening because you're speaking truth." Elizabeth met Sarah's gaze, her nerves settling slightly. "Thanks. I needed that reminder." Sarah smiled. "You've got this. Now go out there and show them why you're the person who can lead this." As Elizabeth walked to the stage, the lights blinding her for a moment, she felt the familiar pulse of anxiety. But there was something different this time. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't hiding behind the shadows anymore. This was her moment, and for the first time, she felt ready. The crowd's applause as she took the stage felt deafening, but it wasn't overwhelming. It was welcoming. She smiled, adjusting the microphone, and began to speak, her voice steady and clear. As Elizabeth stood at the podium, the sea of faces before her seemed to blur for a moment. She took a deep breath and let the weight of the room settle in. For a split second, she thought about stepping back, about retreating into the comfort of her old life. But then, she remembered why she was here in the first place. She was here to speak not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been silenced, overlooked, or dismissed. Her voice echoed through the microphone, steady and clear. "Thank you, everyone, for being here today," she began. "I want to start by saying that what we're talking about today isn't just about diversity, it's about respect. It's about the fundamental belief that every person, no matter their background, deserves to be treated with dignity and given equal opportunities. And it's about the choice we have as individuals and as businesses to make that a reality." The words flowed more easily than she had expected, the nerves that had initially gripped her beginning to dissolve with every sentence she spoke. She spoke from the heart, recounting her own experience of being judged and dismissed, and how it had sparked a deep desire to change the system. "I've been where many of you have been," she continued, glancing around the room. "I've sat across from people who looked at me and decided I didn't belong, simply based on my appearance or the assumptions they made about my worth. And I know that I'm not the only one. This happens to people every day, in every industry, in every corner of the world." The audience was silent, hanging on to every word. Elizabeth felt a quiet confidence building inside her, the sense that this wasn't just a speech, it was a turning point. This was her opportunity to share not just her story, but the stories of so many others who had felt invisible. She wasn't just talking about change anymore. She was calling for action. "What we need is not just better policies," she said, her voice gaining strength. "We need a cultural shift, a mindset change. We need businesses, leaders, and individuals to understand that respect isn't something you earn because of your position or your wealth. It's something every single person deserves, from the moment they walk through the door." As she spoke, Elizabeth could see the heads nodding in agreement. People were listening. And they were ready to act. This movement, this campaign, isn't just about showing up and speaking out for one day. It's about making sure that the respect we talk about here today is reflected in everything we do, every policy we implement, and every person we interact with. It's about making respect not just a buzzword, but a core value that drives how we work, how we lead, and how we live. The applause started slowly at first, but as Elizabeth finished her speech, it grew into a standing ovation. For the first time in her life, Elizabeth felt like she was standing in her own truth. The weight of the moment wasn't heavy anymore. It was empowering. Backstage, as she stepped off the stage, Sarah was waiting for her with a proud smile. "You did it," she said, pulling Elizabeth into a hug. "You really did it." Elizabeth smiled, still catching her breath. "I think I did. It feels different, Sarah. Like I'm not just talking about change anymore. I'm living it." "I think we all are," Sarah replied. "And this is just the beginning." Elizabeth knew Sarah was right. This was just the start. The movement had already gained momentum, and she felt more committed than ever to seeing it through. She wasn't done yet. There was still so much work to be done. But now, she wasn't just the one speaking out, she was part of something much bigger than herself. And with every story she shared, every person she inspired, the change they were all working for felt closer. Later that evening, as Elizabeth sat with William at a quiet dinner, she couldn't stop smiling. The day had been a whirlwind, and her emotions were still catching up with her, but there was a peace inside her that she hadn't felt before. "How does it feel?" William asked, his voice filled with curiosity. "Like the start of something incredible," Elizabeth said, her eyes sparkling. "Like everything I've worked for is finally coming to life." William reached across the table and took her hand, his voice soft and supportive. "You've made something powerful, Elizabeth. And you're not just changing how people see you, you're changing how they see each other." Elizabeth nodded, her heart full. "I just hope I can keep pushing for change. I'm not stopping here. Not now." As they finished their dinner, Elizabeth felt something shift in her once more. She was no longer the person who hesitated in the background. She was leading something important. And with each new step, she was building a future where respect, dignity, and equality weren't just ideals, they were the standard. The day had arrived. Elizabeth stood at the podium once again, but this time, it wasn't just about speaking at a conference or leading a campaign. It was the culmination of everything she had worked for. The movement she had started was now at a place where it was officially being recognized as a force for change. The room before her was filled with leaders, advocates, and business owners, all gathered to hear about the impact that the Respect Starts Here initiative had made over the past year. It had started as a simple idea, one born from her own experience of being judged and dismissed, and now it had become a global conversation. She felt the familiar weight of the moment settle in, but this time, she wasn't overwhelmed. This time, she was ready. As the applause died down and the crowd settled, Elizabeth took a deep breath. She had learned so much since that first meeting at Lakeside Motors. She had learned that standing up for yourself wasn't just about demanding respect in a single moment, it was about creating a ripple that spread into every part of life. It was about changing the way people saw each other, not based on their appearance, but on their character. "Good morning," Elizabeth began, her voice strong and steady. "A year ago, I stood on this stage, unsure of what would come of a simple decision to speak up for myself. Today, I stand before you, proud to say that our movement, your movement, has done more than just raise awareness. It has ignited real change. And it's only just the beginning." The room was filled with the buzz of anticipation. Elizabeth could feel the eyes of the audience on her, but this time, it wasn't intimidating. This time, she was here to share the fruits of their collective work. This was the moment they had all been waiting for, the proof that what they had started together had already begun to reshape the way businesses thought about inclusivity, respect, and equality. "For a long time," she continued, "we talked about respect as if it were an optional part of our interactions. We let assumptions guide our treatment of others, whether it was in business, in our communities, or in our personal lives. And I was guilty of it too. I've walked into rooms and been sized up, judged based on how I looked, what I wore, how I spoke. But what we've learned together over the last year is that respect is not a luxury, it's a necessity. It's the foundation for every successful interaction, every meaningful relationship, and every business that wants to thrive in a diverse world." Elizabeth paused, letting her words sink in. She glanced down at her notes, but she didn't need them. This wasn't about reciting facts or statistics, this was about speaking from the heart. She had lived this journey. Every struggle, every victory, Every step toward this moment had been earned through her determination and the support of countless others who believed in the cause. "We've made great strides," Elizabeth said, her voice growing more passionate, "but we can't stop here. We've seen businesses change, policies shift, and people stand up for themselves. We've seen individuals who once felt invisible now stepping into the spotlight, demanding to be treated with dignity. But there is so much more to do. We need to take these conversations and turn them into action. We need to ensure that the progress we've made doesn't stop with us. This has to be a movement that endures, that continues to challenge every system of bias and discrimination that still exists." The crowd erupted in applause again, but this time, Elizabeth wasn't looking for validation. She knew the work wasn't finished, and the applause was just a reminder that the journey they had started had already taken root. She felt a quiet pride, knowing that her story, the story of how one person's decision to speak up had changed the course of her life, was now part of a larger narrative, one that was being carried forward by others. As she looked out over the audience, she saw faces of every age, gender, and background. This was no longer about her. It was about all of them. It was about the collective power of people who had been overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed, finding their voice and making sure they were heard. As the applause slowly faded, Elizabeth felt a deep sense of accomplishment. This was more than a speech, it was the culmination of a year's worth of work, of countless people coming together to make a change, to challenge systems, and to demand respect where it was so often lacking. She could feel the momentum building around her, and it wasn't just about the work she had done or the personal victories she had achieved. It was about the larger picture, the collective power of everyone who had chosen to join this movement, to stand up and to speak out. After the speech, Elizabeth mingled with attendees, shaking hands and talking to people who shared their own stories of how the Respect Starts Here initiative had affected them. It was overwhelming, in the best possible way. She had started this journey to help herself, but now, she realized, she was helping thousands of others too. Every conversation, every connection, reinforced the importance of the work they were doing. She was no longer just advocating for herself, she was part of a global conversation that was changing the way businesses and individuals treated one another. One particular conversation stood out. A woman in her mid-30s, who introduced herself as Ava, came up to Elizabeth after the speech. Ava was one of the first people to join the movement when the initiative had been shared through social media. Elizabeth remembered her name because Ava's story had resonated deeply with her. Ava had worked for years in a male-dominated industry, feeling ignored and sidelined, but after hearing Elizabeth's story, she found the courage to stand up for herself and, in turn, had inspired others to do the same. "I just wanted to say thank you," Ava said, her voice emotional. "When I first heard your story, I was at a breaking point. I was ready to leave my job because I couldn't take the disrespect anymore. But after hearing what you did, how you stood up, I realized that I wasn't alone. You gave me the courage to start speaking up, to stop accepting the way I was being treated. And now, I'm not just standing up for myself, I'm helping other women in my office find their voices too." Elizabeth felt a rush of gratitude and humility as Ava spoke. "Thank you for sharing that," she replied, her voice filled with emotion. "It means more than you know to hear that." Ava smiled, wiping away a tear. "You've changed the way I look at myself. I'm not just someone who has to put up with it. I'm someone who deserves respect, just like anyone else." As Ava walked away, Elizabeth stood for a moment, absorbing the weight of the conversation. This, she realized, was the power of the movement. It wasn't about her individual journey anymore. It was about the countless lives that were being touched, empowered, and transformed by their collective efforts. Every person who stood up, who spoke out, was part of a larger shift, a shift in how society valued respect, dignity, and inclusion. The rest of the day was a blur of meetings and interviews, but as the evening approached and the event started winding down, Elizabeth felt a quiet sense of fulfillment settle over her. She had come so far from the uncertain woman who had walked into Lakeside Motors that first day, unsure of what the future held. Now, standing on the precipice of something far larger than she had ever imagined, she felt more certain than ever that she was on the right path. That night, as she sat with William in their apartment, reflecting on the events of the day, she realized just how much had changed, not just in the world, but in herself. She had started this journey with one goal: to advocate for respect and fairness, to push back against the dismissive treatment she had faced. But now, she understood that her role was more than just advocating for herself. It was about helping others find their voice, about pushing for systemic change, and about ensuring that respect became the standard, not the exception. "I can't believe how far we've come," she said softly, looking over at William. "A year ago, I was just trying to buy a car. Now, look at all of this." William smiled, his eyes full of pride. "You didn't just buy a car, Elizabeth. You started a movement. And you've inspired more people than you can even imagine." Elizabeth nodded, a sense of peace washing over her. "This isn't over. We've only just begun." As they sat together, Elizabeth felt the weight of what had been accomplished and the promise of what was to come. She was no longer just advocating for change in small moments, she was leading a movement, and there was no turning back now. The work ahead would be hard, but she knew she had the support of the people around her and the belief that respect, equality, and dignity for all were worth fighting for. This was just the beginning of the rest of her life's work.